loud. Okay. Hello, thank you very much, Mary, to accept our invitation and to talk a little bit and reflect a little bit on pedagogy and on multiliteracies. Mary, you are a professor, I'm reading here, the Department of Education, Policy, Organization and Leadership in the beautiful town of Champaign, which is Illinois. Maybe just to inform us a little bit, there was this new London group who in 1996 was launching the concept of multiliteracies, which Link is using now in our mission statement. I don't know if you were present from the beginning, but at least you were correcting also the concept later on in 2007 or 2009. Yes. Could you explain a little bit the roots of this concept?
Well, you know, not only was I there, but Bill Cope and I initiated the New London group because we were in Australia, and we thought at that time that the gap between those who were achieving in schools and not achieving was getting bigger. Despite all our work as academics, all our literature, all our books on literature, we hadn't really touched and improved the lives of those who really needed. So we looked around the English-speaking world that we knew and collected a group, you know, Alan Luke, Gunter Kress, you know, the list, you know the list. And we said, let's meet somewhere, right, to talk about this moment. What does this moment mean? And Courtney Kasdan, who was one of the people that we put together, said, well, I know a place in New London.
Okay.
And we thought that was ironic, a little village called New London up there in, you know, in the United States. So we met at this little inn and left our identities at the door. So we didn't come in as Kress or G or Kalantzis or Norman Fairclough. We said, we're not that. We're just a bunch of people interested in making a genuine difference in the world. So
were there different backgrounds or
different backgrounds? Yes, we're all different backgrounds. Asian, Greek, Australian, American, English, and we had a Torres Strait Islander as well from Australia. So we came in and said, what is this moment that, you know, there were three things. Why are we meeting? You know, what is it that we think we need to do? And then how do you make it happen? So we wanted to be practical, not just theoretical. And we came up with the word first design. The idea was that all learning had to be designed, not taken from textbooks and turning the page. And that you had to recognize who the audience was, who your students were, whether they were children or adults. They brought things with them that were very different. And that the traditional pedagogy with one standard language, right, wasn't going to meet the needs of everybody and prepare them for a future. And even way back then, in you know, almost 28 years ago now, we knew that the digital was going to make a difference. We understood it. So there was multilingualism, multi-dialects, you know, and there was the digital turning up as well. So we thought, how do you prepare for meaning making across disciplines, you know, with an expanded repertoire and understanding what literacy, because literacy is about meaning making. Right?
Exactly, yeah.
And of course, it doesn't have a long history. For most of human history, there wasn't writing or reading, you know, there were other ways. You wrote on your body, on the ground, you played music, you did, you know, like you were synesthetic. But in our traditional schools, we had narrowed meaning making to alphabetical literacy. Put it in a book, and then every discipline was synthesized in the textbook, decided by somebody, and then you had to learn it and do a test at the end. And we thought, well, the time has gone for the necessity of that kind of learning. We need creativity, we need reflection, we need collaborative thinking. The problems of the world have become more complex, we are more interrelated. So therefore you need a different kind of way of understanding the making of meaning, right? and that educators need to design that according to the diversity in the group and the diversity of the disciplines which themselves were changing. And how do you move forward?
And so deal with this complexity also of the world, but also of using all the possibilities we do have, combining all the possibilities. Right. Yeah.
Now, Jim G was part of the group, and he said to us one day when he wasn't so happy, he says, you know, we can have all these ideas, but whilst we have high stakes standardized tests as the measure of knowing, we will never move forward. So you see that, I have to say that up front, that is the barrier in learning, that we standardize and have high stake tests, and you can't go to the next level unless you pass that.
Exactly.
Even if you might understand the world in another language, you know, if you don't have that language, you can't go forward. So we still have that problem, and we have to acknowledge that educators have the test in mind, right? Not so much what they think their learners might need, because that need is prescribed by the traditional classroom. One educator, 20 learners, you know, that sacred textbook, you know. So that's what we were fighting with. But we believe that working lives and personal lives and public lives, you know, the European, you know, citizen worker learner idea, that all those domains were changing, right? They were changing because they needed to harness diverse populations as workers, and they were changing because the digital was sneaking into, you know, exactly, personal life, working life, you know, learner's life. And we said we need to harness that, not leave it to technology to produce things that they want to sell to us, right? That don't have the values of the educator, right? So way back then, we thought all those things, and then all of a sudden COVID came and everybody was thinking the same things.
Exactly, yeah. So by coincidence or not, but we are confronted now with the need for new solutions, other solutions, and it's changing very quickly at this moment. Right. Are we ready, do you think? Is the educational field ready to tackle this challenge?
You know, everybody's saying what I just said. Oh, COVID's changed everything. However, it was a very poor experience for a lot of people because the systems weren't prepared for it. Exactly. The libraries weren't prepared, the schools weren't prepared, the universities weren't prepared. They weren't prepared to move into this space emotionally, psychologically, professionally. So for many people, it was a terrible experience, right? For learners too, who felt isolated, and the tools were worse pedagogy, right? They were very didactic pedagogy. You know, put your lecture on a video, have a little quiz at the end. You know, it was the worst pedagogy because we as educators hadn't designed those tools and hadn't harnessed them. So it's a kind of a Janus face thing, you know, it's kind of good and bad, but the onus is on us to have these conversations, to demonstrate and to invent. In our case, you know, we started with multiliteracies, but we've ended up here at the University of Illinois inventing platforms which allow for peer-to-peer. You know, so in that environment, people learn from each other for collaborative learning, not just for, and that when we talk together, we have these conversations, not lecture online. I mean, imagine lecturing online being better. It's no better or worse than lecturing, you know, in a room with 1,000. So we have to invent new tools. So we've put our money where our mouth is here, and we have also been experimenting with what kind of digital tools you can use, because we believe there are affordances in the digital, you know, anywhere, anytime. It's ubiquitous, right? You can be reflective, you can do differentiated learning, you can break people up into different groups, you can do metacognition, you can, you know, there's all sorts of affordances, but we haven't harnessed them yet, right? And one of them, of course, is multimodality. How do we make meaning with alphabetical literacy or symbolic literacy? How do we make with videos, with audio? How do we express something in history or science in using the different modes. In fact, medicine now can't operate without simulations,
Exactly.
Surgery, architecture, you name the disciplines, even fixing an automobile requires you use the new technology because it has affordances, right? And we carry, in our pockets, these things that are our prostheses, like we don't have to remember telephone numbers. We can look something up. So how do we use that? And how do we help adults and children be discerning, because now the access is much broader than the books in the library.
Exactly.
On
Yeah.
the shelf in the library.
Does that mean that we have to put also emphasis on the critical aspect of learning? I mean, because we are overwhelmed by so many sources of news and information.
Yes.
And how do you deal with that with your students, for example?
Yes. We always had to deal with the critical, but it was constrained critical.
Yeah.
Right? So you read a textbook or you read science and you do a little bit of questioning. But now you're exposed and open to anything, anywhere around the world, right? So what we do is we say every individual, with even little kids, even in kindergarten, bring with them knowledge, bring with them emotional capacities, and that you have to engage them in whatever you're learning, not pretend they're a tabula rasa, that they come in with nothing, and in the time that you have, you're going to teach them things, right? And they have to remember them and have a test. But that means that the traditional classroom, right, of one person, 30 learners, doesn't work for that kind of understanding. You need collaborative teaching as well as collaborative learning. You need to bring other people in, either digitally like this or materially. So it means rethinking the living and the learning. Right? Because in traditional learning, we've left living behind, right? Over there somewhere. And we say, now we're going to only experience living through the interpretation of a book.
Yeah. And does that cope with the traditional educational system in the United States at this moment? I mean, there is still a curriculum. You have to reach certain results, evidence-based maybe.
No, I can say all this to you, but the truth is that institutional systems change very slowly. And the reasons we have education, right, formal education, is we have a duty of care to another generation. And we have a syllabus, a curriculum, rules about that duty of care, which is from a traditional way of learning. And in fact, in America now, there's a tug of war, as you know. They're banning books here at the moment. Exactly. It's a very much divided world because there's no common knowledge anymore, right? Everybody can choose what knowledge they want, what media source they want, what they will read. And so we have very much a lot of tension. So it's a difficult moment for those of us who want to shape a better future, which is inclusive and cohesive.
Exactly.
Right? Inclusive and cohesive. That's when we met in New London, the Multiliteracies was about inclusion and cohesion, right? And expanding repertoire. And that's why we provided tools, like in our pedagogical tools, if we have, that you have to have experiential learning, you have to have cognitive learning, you have to have theoretical learning, and you have to have applied learning. And that you have to go through these cycles, choose the cycle. Somebody might not need experiential, but they might need conceptual. But it's not just instructional activities that keep people busy, right? And that usually that's what textbooks are, instructional activities that keep you busy. But a learner, an educator as a designer has to say, well, this group here has never been to a forest, right? So I can teach them about a forest from a book, but how about we go to a forest?
Or going to the forest, exactly. Experiencing.
And it's an experiential thing. But then we have to understand photosynthesis, and we have to understand ecology. And so then you have to do the theoretical work, the naming, and then you have to apply it. So what do I do now? Well, maybe I'll look at my garden and see how, or I'll join a group that wants to save the forest. So it's designing learning, right? And this was important for us way back then in multiliteracies, that to break through the traditions that served a different time when we wanted people to be particular kind of people.
Exactly.
They're going to have the same job for life. They're going to obey the rules. But now it's not like that. Our kids, even little kids, take up this device, right? And they use it better than I use it.
Yeah.
Right? And even little ones accidentally sometimes, or depending on how the parents do, they know stuff that we never knew at 5 and 6 and 10 and 11, right? So we have to be aware of that. And we can say it's not coming in the classroom, but if it doesn't come in the classroom, what do we prepare them for?
Yeah, exactly. Does that mean that 25 years ago you had these concepts of multiliteracies, that now you can see that the teacher training and education training is very different? The approach of training for teachers need other angles, let's say, I guess, no?
Yes, it's the whole ecosystem, really. We're kind of, we inch a little bit towards it's 1 foot back, forward, a few back. And the thing is that experts, right, are very difficult to shift. Anyone who is expert, and expertise is very difficult to change. So in our teacher training colleges, we have experts with traditional expertise, and they don't want to get it wrong. And then they have a state that certifies them according to very specific things. So breaking out is very difficult, right? So they do things in the margins. However, in America, and maybe there in Belgium, one of the biggest issues in the classroom is what they call behavior. Now, why is behavior an issue? Because these learners come from an environment that is so far away from the traditional classroom. Now, when you and I went to school, we wore a uniform, we did as we were told, we didn't choose our breakfast, we didn't choose our clothes, we didn't choose...
Everything was prepared for us, yeah.
But not now. These kids at home, they're friends with their relatives and parents. They negotiate meaning, they have access. Then they come to the classroom, they have to sit in rows and put their hand up to go to the bathroom, right? So behavior has become a very big issue, but it's not the kids' fault. It's that the living and learning has not kept up with where life has gone. It's multimodal, it's multicultural, more multicultural than we ever thought. We thought people were going to assimilate. It doesn't happen. They become more different. They change their bodies, they piece their bodies, they shape their bodies, they speak, Twitter, we haven't become assimilated, but we're humans. And what we have to understand is what humanity is, right? What is humanity? How can we incorporate diversity and respect and cohesion? Because that is now our biggest goal.
Exactly,
right?
Yeah. And sometimes we forget that is the main mission, let's say, of education and teachers, no? To say, why are you doing this beautiful job, of course, no? But sometimes we are focusing too much on this curriculum and results, and not seeing who is in front of us and which are the needs of our public.
Well, in America, they've got something now called social emotional learning. Maybe but it's just become another bit of curriculum, and it has,
really,
you tick them off. But of course, it matters, but it has to be an ecosystem, the whole ecosystem. Now we're going to do the 10 minutes. They have 15 minutes in the morning to do social emotional learning.
And then it stops. Yeah.
Well, I'm not saying that teachers, educators are good people, like it's the most important job you can have in the world, to be an educator, right? It's an honorable and for me, almost a sacred job, because you're trying to influence somebody. So you have to have their interest in mind, but then you have to have the social in mind. It's not just about the individual, but the social, the individual in the social. How will they operate? With narrow views? Will they try and understand people making meaning in different ways? How will they negotiate and interpret? I mean, that's what multiliteracies is all about, really.
Exactly, yeah. Last year, I was doing some interviews on Paulo Freire, the Brazilian pedagogue, who was born 100 years ago, but still his points of view are very relevant. And one of the aspects I wanted to ask you also, education for Paulo Freire is also politicization. So there is also a political aspect. Do you agree with that? When you learn, you are speaking and learning about elements of a society. So not party political, but political in a broad interpretation, no?
Now, I'm of Greek background, right? So political means polis, which is the city, the urban, the social. Exactly. So I don't think party politics happens is good for us. What we have to kind of understand is that we're social, whether we're in a little community or a large community, we're social. So the living together matters. And the focus has to be on how you share resources, how you make meaning, how you interpret meaning, how fairness and justice operate, because everybody wants fairness and justice for themselves. So how does that operate with somebody that's different? So I don't think, I think politics in the old-fashioned party political is getting a bad name. And people are not comfortable, or they don't even believe in it anymore. You can see that, you know, they want strong men and they want authority and they want to be kept from strangers. You know, we're seeing this very strange phenomenon across the world, not just in America and in Europe too. You know, we're still scared of, you know, because we don't share resources across the world. There are people, as you know, in poverty and from war that move around the world for a better life. Well, how do we understand that? Do we say you can't share with me? Or, you know, so the political has to be, for me, the idea of the social, you know, how do we understand the social and how do we prepare for inclusive sociality? You know, and if you reject somebody, they're going to become more antagonistic towards you, right? So how do we negotiate and how do we understand across multiple languages, multiple choices of clothing, multiple choices of behavior, and where is the common good, right? And how do we negotiate that? And it takes negotiation. It's hard to do it just by edict nowadays.
Exactly, yeah. So last question, Mary, is in September we have, or UNESCO, this International Literacy Day. Now, apparently this year it's about transforming literacy learning spaces, and Link is an adult learning organization. So we are very interested in knowing what should be done to convince adults to learn. What do you think about that aspect?
You know, literacy is a difficult word for us because it's too much linked to symbolic and alphabetic, you know, right, rather than meaning making. So first of all, we say, how do we make meaning? What are the tools for making meaning? Right. So I think that's the first thing we have to say. If we do that, we'll see that the tools are great. Everything from gesture to bodies, to language, to sound, you know, to video. So what are all the sources of meaning making, right? How do we interpret them? How do we learn to use them? How do we to understand somebody else? So I think that's really important. And that comes to that thing that we said very early. We need to have repertoires about meaning making, because you have to prepare people for the power of alphabetical literacy or symbolic literacy, whether it's Chinese or Arabic or whatever. There's power in that because that's how things are done. But it's not the only power, right? So that's why repertoire, multimodality really matters. But then you have to have a pedagogy for it, right? What is the pedagogy? Whether they're adults, you have to find out the diversity. What do they know, right? What is it that they know? Yeah. How do they move from what they know to what they want to know and what they need to know, right? And it's a design answer, right? So it's not good enough to say we're doing literacy and we're going to have a big open space.
Exactly. Yeah.
For example, it takes a flexible pedagogy. It takes an understanding of multimodality, and it takes a very much an understanding of diversity that the people bring and what they have that they bring into the classroom. Like, I'll just give you a tiny little example. My son was going to a Montessori school, and one day they called me up as the mother and they said, "Oh, we're very worried about your son." I said, "Why is that?" He says, "Oh, he doesn't know his colors. He doesn't recognize colors." I said, "Well, his grandmother, who's Greek, looks after him. Have you ever thought about asking him his colors in Greek?"
In Greek. Exactly. Yeah.
So the little boy knew his colors. It's just that
in another language. Yeah.
In Greek, because his grandmother in Australia was looking after him, you see. So, but that's a tiny example, but every learner brings something like that.
Yeah.
Bring experience, they bring fear, they bring trauma, they bring joy, they bring desire. And whoever's involved in that learning space has to be open to finding out, who the learners are, what they want, and and then to collaborate with others to create those experiences, the pedagogical experiences that will transform them. Because transformation is what we're after. Like if you want to learn math, you want to be transformed to go to math. And the other thing, the word that we use now about grammar is transpositions, right? You move backwards and forwards between language. Look, I'm talking to you with my hands now and I'm being expressive. I'm moving backwards and forwards between the language, my hands, engaging with you, looking for feedback from you. So grammar is not the labels of a language. It's the shifts that are made, right? You're moving backwards and forwards, and you need to understand it like that in meaning making. So if the UNESCO wants a more positive, forward-looking idea, then they have to, as I said, understand the learner, have a professional that's trained to understand pedagogical repertoires, and designing experiences to transform learners.
So instead of transforming the spaces, besides the spaces, it's important, it's rather, according to you, more putting emphasis on transforming as a learning process and as a human being also, which is a challenge.
Yes. You're to view it as an ecosystem, right? An ecosystem needs air, light, water, spacing, and the ecosystem is that. It's not just the authority of the teacher, the authority of the books, the discipline of the learner, right? They are not the components, the only components of learning. Right?
Exactly.
We need to expand repertoires and to love what we're doing. I know that's not a word that people like to use, but there has to be some love about what you're doing and a love for the learners, because our learners are so different. It's very hard to have empathy for them, right? And if without empathy and understanding, you can't transform anybody.
Exactly, yeah. Okay, thank you very much for this beautiful message about the love, necessity to also for empathy, but also the inspiration you gave us. We take it with us and with our audience to reflect more on the importance of multiliteracy.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Lovely to talk to you. Bye-bye.